Yes, on to the Sharing Leading Practice event. If you've never been to one before, just to sort of fill you in, the Sharing Leading Practice events provide opportunities for you to immerse yourself in the context and practice of a school with particular expertise in a specific area, phase or subject, often accredited through our QA review process. We're very lucky today to be joined by Sarah Cairns and Emma Fox from the Empowering Minds Academy Trust, who are going to be running their session on writing, exemplification, moderation and comparative assessment in the primary years. I'll let them give their own introductions, but before anything else, we'll go through a couple of housekeeping bits and bobs, just to make you aware that the session is being recorded for those who can't be here today, and of course it's there for your reference as well if you wish to go onto the websites to look over what's been discussed today, and it'll be a useful tool for you later on. Please do mute yourself throughout, unless of course you're reading out a question or want to speak when the opportunity arises. Do note down any questions or comments that you may have. We're going to have lots of opportunities to speak up and to speak out, especially at the end. We'll have a bit of a Q&A session there too. And really, I think it's only left for me to hand over to Emma and Sarah. So thank you very much both. Over to you.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning. Can you share the slides, please, Mark? Oh, thank you. That's great. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending this morning. I'll start with some introductions. I'm Sarah Cairns, and I'm currently the CEO at Empowering Minds Academy Trust in Doncaster, and a senior partner of the Doncaster Hub for Challenge Partners, alongside two other senior partners, Beres Nixon and Janice James. My background is really in English, and I did work as a literacy consultant 20 years ago. Actually saying that out loud isn't great, but it's good to admit it. So 20 years ago, yes. And since 2006, I've been in leadership, working as a head. Can you still hear me or see me? I seem to have gone blank on the screen.
Yeah, I can still see you and hear you.
Okay, that's better. Okay. Where was I? As a head since 2006, an executive head, and now have taken on this role. And we've been working together now as a trust since 2017. With me today is Emma Fox, a colleague of mine, again, for over 20 years now. She's currently working as the deputy head at Southfield Primary, which is a school, one of the schools in our trust. And she works with me centrally in school improvement, working, supporting English in each school and ensuring consistency. And she does that for 2 days a week. And I really value her working alongside me with her expertise. But we'll soon be losing her because she's secured a headship in September. So brilliant for you, Emma, and hopefully we'll still be working together.
I really hope so, yeah.
We are really genuinely happy for you.
Oh, thank you.
So what we're sharing today has been in development now for 2 years, and it's still developing. It's a whole trust approach, and it's based on the Education Endowment Foundation guidance for improving literacy in the early years, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. It's also based on existing exemplification materials that are already out there and comparative assessment systems. And we were asked to share this work, and we're really happy to do it, but it is still in development. It's an approach that we've been developing for all year groups in primary, from reception through to year 6. And it's a particular support for progression of writing, and we find those year groups that are not statutorily assessed. It's an attempt really to simplify moderation and the assessment of writing. Please use the chat for any questions or comments or reflections, although there will be some opportunities throughout this morning to stop and ask questions verbally. Next slide, please, Mark. Brilliant. Okay, so as part of setting up this morning, we were asked to provide some questions, some provocations really, and around the purpose of what brought us to put this into place. So why did we start this journey? Is writing taught and assessed consistently throughout the primary years? Well, for us, no. We were getting inconsistencies and therefore perceived or otherwise issues with progress between the year groups and throughout the year. And what that led to, what we were finding, was a bit of a closed mindset regarding sharing and confidence to share, which was possibly rooted in subject knowledge. And what we needed was the culture to shift. We needed openness and collaboration, and we really needed to support teacher subject knowledge in the teaching of English, but particularly the teaching of writing and the assessment of writing. And we needed something other than the year 2 and year 6 model, the externally moderated model, which does take up time. It is time consuming, but it is necessary for those statutory year groups. And we needed something that we could all agree to within our schools and across the trust that really showed progress and that we were not going to deviate from that. And if we were, and we were going to challenge it, then we asked those open questions and discussed that together. Okay, so are all teachers confident in discussing writing outcomes and next steps? Well, again, no, not in our settings, not all. There were again inconsistencies within schools and across the trust around those writing outcomes and where we were going to take children next in their writing journeys. And there were pockets of strength, but the inconsistencies we were finding mainly around those non-statutory year groups. So not all, but some in year 1, year 3, year 4, and to some extent year 5. Although we were finding some year 5 teachers were using that year 6 model of moderation. And it linked, that we think the issues pretty much linked through when we were asking teachers and looking at planning to the way that there are end of phase statements in the national curriculum for English in Key Stage 2 in particular. So end of year 4, for example, and end of year 6 in those phases. Not so much with grammar, punctuation, spelling, as the expectations are easier to translate, but some gaps in composition. And we were finding particular gaps in teacher confidence in years 3 and 4. Again, you know, that's a broad brush statement, not everybody, but that's where we were finding it. And again, linked to the teaching sequence for English and linked to the writing sequence within that English teaching sequence. So that I shared some of those findings with the local research school, Doncaster Research School, and they asked if we would put together a year 3, 4 writing network to support schools if they were interested in joining, schools that had previously been part of research school programmes linked to EF literacy. And that formed a series of workshops, and we were finding it was becoming really two-way. So teachers were opening up and sharing both successes, so what was working well and their even better ifs. And it led to those three workshops, and we're hoping for some more actually. We're hoping we can grow that even further. So, do assessment checklists stifle the teaching of writing? Well, there's a contentious one. I guess the answers for us from our research was yes and no. So, some useful checklists in teaching linked to success criteria and next steps in learning, but also some overuse of those in assessment, particularly overuse in moderation could, and we were seeing a kind of, again, these are the inconsistencies I'm talking about here, it's not for everyone, particularly it was like a writing by numbers approach. So if we have these elements on a checklist, then we can teach these elements, or children perceive that we will include these elements to everything. And we were finding that on speaking to pupils that there was some pupil perception about what they thought teachers wanted to see in their writing, instead of that what their teachers wanted them to do was to really focus in on the audience for their writing and the purpose of their writing, which actually drives everything, drives the outcome. So we think about what we want, who we're writing for, and what the purpose of that writing is for, and the more realistic, the better. And we work backwards in a sequence from there. So in our exemplification, we do have some annotations that support it. And in the early days of putting together these annotations, some teachers were using them as a checklist, so checking off those elements of the annotations. And what we were finding was the perceived outcomes of writing were dropping because they were looking for all of those aspects. It's not about that. So the annotations really as a guide for teachers, but not a guide for teaching, if that makes sense. Okay, so transition to Key Stage 2. How are Year 3 and Year 4 teachers supported? I've already talked a little bit about that, but we do prioritise these groups, and we prioritise them in moderation. So I have a particular keenness around Year 4. So when we have our moderation events, I'll facilitate the Year 4 group, and Emma, she facilitates the Year 3, so we can keep that watchful eye and grow those relationships with the teachers of those year groups across our trust. And we're really finding that that is opening up conversation. Okay, and finally, in the purpose, can we standardise or exemplify writing throughout the year in each year group? Well, yes, we can, but we need to locally agree that. So it's not set in stone. It's not something that I would say everybody, everywhere has to make sure that our writing compares to these, but it's our approach. It's our locally agreed trust approach. And we've used, and I'll go on to talk about this in more detail later as we really dig into that comparison and how we do it. So we all do need to agree a standard, but that standard really is what we'd call like a progression route, particularly in those years like Year 3 and 4, where we've got end of phase expectations at the end of Year 4. We have to start there and then map it back. So we map it back to November, for example, in Year 3, and March in Year 3, and June in Year 3, and the same in Year 4. So I'll talk more about that as we go along. We did have some starting points for this, so it's not just that we've chosen it out of thin air, and I'll go on to talk about that more as we move on. So Emma, I'll hand over to you to talk about the teaching sequence for writing and how it started.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Just before I start then, has anyone got any questions? Does anyone want to put anything in the chat, or does anyone want to ask anything before we move on? Just give you a few seconds to see if anything comes up. Alternatively, we can have a question and answer session at the end. Okay, I'm not seeing anything then. So if there is anything, jot it down or keep it in your head and we'll answer at the end. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about the journey following on from what Sarah's spoken about to you this morning already. And these are the aspects that I'm going to cover. So I'm going to pretty much give you a really condensed version of the writing process today, covering elements like the EF documents, which we'll talk about in a minute, purpose and audience, next steps, support, transparency, and also the importance of children revising and editing their writing. Okay, so we're going to cover each of those aspects in a little bit of detail. So if we can have the next slide, we will begin. Thank you. So everything that we've looked at in our mat has come from these key core documents, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with those. So we've got the early years document, Preparing for Literacy. Then we've got the recently revised Improving Literacy in Key Stage 1 guidance report, which incidentally Sarah was asked to review. So I think her name's in there. So she was involved in that document and its implementation. And then Improving Literacy in Key Stage 2. The beauty of these reports, as you know, is that everything is entrenched in evidence and research. So there's evidence behind everything that we do in terms of writing. So these documents have heavily infiltrated everything that we've covered around the writing process. Okay, so if we can move on. Could just have the next slide, please. And just while we're waiting for them to come, these slides, the slides that I'm going to cover now and the strands that I'm going to cover are taken from the Improving Key Stage 2 document. Okay, so obviously within those documents, there's a wealth of work on oracy and then reading into writing. So we're looking at the third part of it, which is writing. And strand 4 is all about teaching writing composition strategies through modelling and supported practice. And within strand 4, it talks about writing being made up of 7 components. Now, probably lots of you like us know these components off by heart, but if they are new to anyone, I'll read them out just in case. So planning, drafting, sharing, evaluating, revising, editing, through to a final outcome, publishing. And effective writers use a number of strategies to support each component, which we'll talk about. Children should learn how, when, and why to use each of these 7 components. They need to all be explicitly and heavily modelled by the teacher in the first instance. And then gradually, that release of responsibility metacognition model should come into play, so that each stage would look very different at the beginning of this process, at the beginning of a year group, to how it would look in the middle. And then at the end, you're hoping for children to be much more independent writers and to doing lots of these things by themselves with less modelling. And certainly as they move up through school into upper key stage 2, that's the pattern that you'd expect to see. Okay, so I think if we can move on to the next slide, strand 5, please. So strand 5 is all about developing pupils' transcription and sentence construction skills through lots and lots of extensive practice. This is also really crucial, so that when children are thinking about strand 4, when they are thinking about the composition of their writing, they're freed up from thinking about these elements. So there's lots of evidence to suggest that if spelling is explicitly taught and explicit covered, if handwriting is, then when children come to compose and write and draft and share, those things are happening intrinsically, and they can then think about the content of what they're writing. Children need extensive practice in handwriting, in spelling, and lots of really high quality, effective oral feedback for them to improve. Spelling should be explicitly taught to children aside from the writing sessions. And where there are difficulties and where there are misconceptions, diagnostic assessments should be used to really shed light on what's going wrong, where is that child struggling in spelling, and that would then inform the teaching or the intervention. Sentence construction similarly, and sentence combining techniques should be practiced outside of these sessions, so that children are developing the skills that they need, the transcription skills, to really think about composition and content. So it does really free them up. So if these things are covered, we know that the evidence says that children will improve and will make progress and will become confident, proficient writers. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we've got the 7 components of the writing process, which probably most of you are familiar with, if not all. And I've read those out, so I won't reread them. But I just wanted to make a really important point that these components here wouldn't have to necessarily be across 1 week. They might be, but they might just be across one part of the writing. So say, for example, you were writing a report with the children and you were modelling and teaching and the children were drafting the introduction. All of these 7 components might come into play in that one section. So they can be used in lots of different ways. So you would use them across and spread them across the entire writing process, but you might use them for each individual paragraph and each individual chunk of writing, and that's absolutely okay. But it's very important that we start with the planning and follow this sequence through to that final published outcome, through to that publishing. Okay. Next slide, please. So audience and purpose are really, really key. And this little piece of information here that I'm going to share with you is from the EF document. Consideration of purpose and audience is vital, is crucial for effective writing. Children, just like we do, they need a purpose and a reason to write, as we know. And I noticed, I mean, I have the opportunity usually in non-COVID times to go into lots of schools and to sit in and observe lots of different writing sessions. And it's really clear when you go into a classroom, if the children are writing for a purpose and are writing to someone specific, because there's a buzz around the writing and children are really happy to talk around it. If children just compliantly writing because they've been told to do it and it's going in the book, but there's no real reason behind it, that buzz just isn't there. So it's really important that we bear those things in mind. Memorable experiences, trips, out of school, writing to visitors into school, they can all help to create a purpose for writing. So it's about being as innovative and creating as possible, so that the children are really hooked right at the outset and really engaged. And it's important that children think carefully and modify their writing according to the audience that they're writing for. And that includes selecting a very appropriate form or genre for the piece of writing. And the children need to learn the features and the conventions of that genre as they are unpicking and reading that text type before they get to that writing stage. And exposing children to a really rich range of genres and key features will support this. But the audience and purpose will influence heavily the writing process. And that comes into play right from the outset, right from the planning stage, very much into the revisions and the edits towards the end of the writing stage, right through to publishing. So that audience, that purpose of writing should be core right from the outset. It really should infiltrate every stage of the writing process. So if you go into a classroom, it should be, the children should be able to tell you right away why they're writing and who they're writing for. That's really, really crucial. Okay, next slide, please. So, as we said, a real audience purpose are at the very heart of the sequence of writing. And there are 4 main purposes to writing, really, aren't there? So to describe, to narrate, to inform, and to persuade. In terms of narrative, we know that there are stories, there are tales, there are fables within poems. And then within non-narrative type, we've got recounts, we've got reports, we've got instructions, we've got explanation text, we've got persuasion, and we've got discussion. And that should get progressively more difficult, shouldn't it, over the different year groups. So a recount, for example, in early years and Key Stage 1 will be probably a fairly simple recount, particularly in early years and year 1, perhaps recounting a trip or a visit or something memorable within school. But as children move through school, that should look quite different. So the recount in year 2 might take the form of a diary entry or a letter, for example. In year 3, it could be some journalistic writing. It could be a newspaper article, a newspaper report. In year 4, it might take the place of a diary. It might look like that. In year 5, it might be a biography of someone, a famous person, someone influential. And then in year 6, you're looking at the entire range, depending on where the children are at in their learning. So every text type should get progressively more difficult and should look different across each year group. Just wanted to make that point. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. In terms of audience that we've used at within our trust and within the school that I work at with Southfield, we've had really good success with authors. I think authors are easier to connect with and hook up with than ever before, particularly with the use of social media, with Twitter. So we've engaged heavily with lots of authors, and even during the pandemic, actually, we were able to make contact with authors, and where they would normally have come into school and spoken to the children in person, they were very happy to do sessions via Teams and Zoom. So that's a great audience, and I think the children love hooking up question and answer sessions before they get to a piece of writing, and then they really love to send the writing to authors and get feedback, and that's worked really well for us, as I'm sure it has for some of you. Persuasive letters to key individuals, so within the school setting, it might be to the head teacher, for example, if they feel very strongly about an issue within school. It might be to the school cook. It might be to the PE lead, for example. But then as we're looking at audiences outside of school, it might be a counsellor, it might be a mayor, it might even be an MP. It might even be the Prime Minister. I think aim as high as you can. If you've got children hooked and engaged and motivated and really interested in a subject, and you give them the opportunity to write and possibly influence something, then that's a really powerful tool. We make sure that at the end of our writing outcomes, everything's published. So some of that might be published on the school website. It might involve really innovative uses of technology, green screens, and so on, drama productions, lots and lots of ways of getting the children's work out there and published and on view. We've written across the year groups in the trust, brochures to display in public buildings, so is different centre in the community, and children love nothing more than being taken by their teacher, walking to the village that we are in Armthorpe, and seeing their brochures, their posters on view. It's extremely rewarding and motivating for them. Also, I think we've got a connection with the care home before the pandemic, but we've kept that up. And writing stories and writing leaflets and things for care homes bring a lot of joy to people there, especially in the past where they couldn't have visitors. So that's a lovely audience. One of our schools within the trust at the minute have been writing stories of the railway children, and they've taken those to the care home. They were really, really well received by the residents, who really loved reading them or having them read too. Also, I've seen some lovely work within the trust where fictional characters become the audience, and the children truly, truly start to believe in these characters, for example, Dracula or someone else, and they create kind of a dialogue, and they're writing to that character, and that character's writing back. It's really the teacher, but the children believe so much that they really do believe they're writing to that character. So there's a wealth of audiences there, and I'm sure you've got many more which you might want to share at the end. But these are the ones that I've seen working really well in our trust. Okay, if we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So this is the success criteria that we follow in our trust when we are modelling writing. So this is right at the beginning of the writing process. The teacher will have unpicked the text type with the children, and then it's time to write. So the teacher will write using the graphic organizer and features of the text type. And I'm going to show you an example of some of the graphic organizers that we've used shortly. And the audience and purpose that we've just spoken about are absolutely core. So in front of the children, in front of the teacher, there will be features of the text type, there will be the audience and purpose to give it real clarity, and there will be the graphic organizer that the teacher's using to plan on and that children will use. And I'll show you those in a moment. Each model writing session should be short to keep children's attention and focus, no more than 10 to 15 minutes. And obviously, you really make that work for your children. It might be slightly less than that, especially when they've missed huge chunks of learning, given the current situation. Model writing, we always say, should be handwritten so that children can see the teacher actually writing. And the model writing goes on flipped art paper with a date. It's then hung on the English working wall or on the washing line and then referred to again and again. And that model supports all children, but particularly those with SEND or particularly vulnerable children. It gives them a reference point. It's really crucial that it stays up there for them to see. There should be a clear purpose. So every session should be focused upon a specific objective and objective-led and driven. And teachers always have a really rough plan of what this is first. They know exactly what the focus for each session is. And teachers model the thinking process. So they might say, well, this is one example. I'm trying to show that it's autumn without actually saying it's autumn. I want to write a really long sentence here, but now I'm going to write a much shorter sentence for impact. So it's that whole metacognitive process of modelling and thinking aloud and making thought processes really, really explicit. Sentences are rehearsed out loud. So we have a mantra across our school and across our trust of say, write, check. So say the sentence, write the sentence, check it. That looks different in different year groups. In year 6, it's a more complex version of that, but it's very much the teacher practicing those skills and making everything explicit. The teacher will practice, rehearse a sentence. He or she will then write the sentence and then reread it. So right from the outset, after each sentence, after each paragraph, that editing, that revising, that rereading, can I improve this? Can I edit it? Is a mantra that's built in, that's really, really explicit. Okay. Thank you. So next slide, please. And then the gradual release of responsibility model comes into play in a very metacognitive way. So an explicit description of the strategy and how it should be used. Modelling of the writing strategy in action by the teacher. And then collaborative use of the strategy in action. And the children then having lots and lots of guided practice using these writing strategies, and then this gradual release of responsibility model leading to independent use of the strategy. So our teachers very much know that their writing sessions will look different at different points in the year. September, October, heavy modelling, very, very explicit. February, less so. And by the summer, really, we want lots of independence with those writers, regardless of year group. And then it starts again in September because the children have been away from school. But it will look different because they're in the next year group. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay, so I said I'd show you some of the graphic organisers. So we're at the first stage now of writing, which is planning. And this should be brief, it should be succinct, and it should be about setting goals, generating ideas before children write. And this planning stage would be modelled by the teacher in the first writing session, and the children would then follow that model. And we have had a lot of success using these graphic organisers here. So you can see a narrative example there. I think it's for a story based on Escape to Pompeii. So the 5-part narrative story there, setting and characters. And these graphic organisers and plans have developed over time, and teachers have made their own. Some teachers like to put in the vocabulary that they expect the children to use, and the children then select the vocabulary and put it on their plan. And then tick off when they've written each word, so they'll do it to a consult in terms of the vocabulary that they choose to use in their writing. But if these graphic organisers are used across school, right from early years, right across to year 6, then they become entrenched and embedded in children's minds and in children's long-term memories. And by the time children get to upper key stage 2, particularly if they're really gifted or talented or kind of very confident writers, they can create their own and make them their own. And they're examples that we've used really well. Obviously, there's lots of other different ways, but these are ones that we wanted to show you today that work for us. Okay, so that's the planning stage: quick, succinct, clear goals, clear objectives, clear vocabulary, clear purpose, and the audience and purpose are crucial too at that planning stage. So who are we writing for? Some staff like to put the audience and purpose on, and I think that's probably a good thing because it keeps the children really focused on why they're writing and who they're writing for. Okay, thank you. Next slide. And then we move into the drafting and the sharing stage. Okay, so the teacher will model each part of the writing, beginning with the introduction or the opening paragraph, and it's objective led, like I said, and then children get the chance to draft their own piece of writing, following on from that model. And like I say, the teacher's model is left up for vulnerable or for SEN children to refer to, not copy, but to refer to. And children also get the chance to share with each other and to give each other feedback, and the teacher would share with the children and the children would share with them. So the children are given feedback at each stage. So careful, explicit modelling of the strategies, and then a chance for children to copy and draft and share with each other. Okay, just some examples there from some of our year 4 writers. You can see little snapshots of feedback, verbal feedback, written feedback from the teacher as the child's writing. Some other examples here of children within a year 4 class at our school drafting and sharing and really thinking carefully about what's been modelled and how they're going to apply it in their own writing. And again, really clear objectives, driving that writing, making it precise, holding it together. Next slide, please. And then we move to the evaluation stage. So that's where the planning, the success criteria is referred back to, and have children done what they set out to do? Have they met their objectives? Have they met their writing goals, their success criteria? And if they haven't, then children are then given the chance to go back and to revise and edit, which we'll talk about. But this evaluation stage is really important. So thinking about the initial audience and purpose, the initial objectives, the initial success criteria, have they been successful? And if they haven't, or there's things they want to improve, it's crucial that they go back and are given the chance to revise and edit that writing. And that revision and those editings are happening in each writing session, but then they're happening at the end of the writing before the publishing stage as well. So it's a constant process. Okay, so they might want to improve the vocabulary, for example. They might think that they haven't used the most effective, the most precise vocabulary. They might want to change that. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of revising and editing, the key differences, when children are revising, which is happening throughout the writing process, they're taking a second look at their ideas. They might cut some out, they might move things about, they might scrap initial thoughts, they might change things to make it more interesting for the reader. When children are editing, they're also taking a second look. But they're thinking really in terms of grammar and punctuation and sentence structure and spelling, and they will have a dictionary, and they're really turning that writing into a very, very polished piece of writing, and the audience is informing that all the time, core. And I think it's important that children know that editing and revising and changing things around are a huge part of any author's work. So we talk to them about how writers do revise and edit and the revisions that they make. So those things are very, very important, and our children know that. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So revising, making changes to the content of the writing in light of feedback and evaluating, okay. The work might become a little bit messy because children are making changes, but that's okay. So some examples here might be asking a peer to look at writing, asking a partner to look at the writing, and they might put question marks next to things that they don't understand. Or children might be thinking of synonyms for words that are repeated throughout. So if they're constantly using colossal, that needs addressing, doesn't it, before it goes to publication, before it goes to an author. So they're just some examples of revisions that children might make. Okay, if we can move on. So editing, really ensuring before that text goes to publication, before it goes to its final audience, that it's accurate and coherent. And spelling and grammar are really important and crucial in this last stage. And children need to recognise, don't they, that the writing needs to be accurate if the readers and the audience need to engage with it. Again, a gradual release of responsibility model. So the teacher will model this revising and editing process explicitly throughout the writing process, so that gradually children are doing it and more becoming more and more independent in their revisions and editing. So they might check capital letters, full stops, they might review spellings using a dictionary. And all of those things happen, and then you get this beautiful polished piece of published work, and that's where we need to get to. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. And just a few more words about revision and editing, revising and editing. Just establishing that expectation in the classroom that these things are happening, that children are expected to proofread and do these things. Setting aside class time for children to collaborate and revise and edit, as I've spoken about. Highly modelled initially with a gradual release of responsibility model. I've given you some examples, so I won't read that. And then, as I've said, the say, write, check mantra aids natural revising and editing. And if the teacher's reading it out and making everything really explicit, then the children naturally do the same. And you walk into classrooms in our school and our trust, and children are reading it and they are talking about it because they've had this way now for 2 or 3 years. And they're entrenched in it, and it really has improved their writing. Next slide, please. Okay, just some images of publishing in terms of displays. So this is a display within our trust. At this point, I just want to nod to, well, a big nod actually to the Inspire partnership in London. We were lucky enough to go and visit one of their schools within their trust, and we were wowed by their learning environments and their displays. And from that, we took their learning environment policy. They were very happy to share it with us, and we endorsed it within our schools, within our trust. And as a result, we now have some really beautiful displays. So this is one example from early years. It's up in our school now. It went up about two weeks ago, where children published some writings right from the very early stages there. Okay, next slide, please. The next one that you're going to see is actually just a display that I found on Twitter. I can't remember where it's from, but it's beautiful. I think it's a really lovely way of displaying writing with key vocabulary and key points, and a really innovative use. I always like to save images that I like to share with our staff. Next one then, please. The final one, just while waiting for it to come up, but it's a drama presentation. It's actually our year 4, and they wrote their own play scripts to Oliver Twist around Christmas time, and then they were able to perform one virtually, and it was then filmed and shared with parents and carers. Okay, next slide. And publishing, presenting work so that others can read it. It might not be the outcome for all pieces of writing, but when it's used appropriately, it can be a really strong incentive for extremely high quality writing. Okay. You've seen some examples there of work being displayed, and we've talked about reasons for publishing, but just some words of caution really. There must be a purpose for publishing. Not every piece of work needs publishing, and for different children within different classes it will look very different, and some children, as we know, aren't ready to publish. It's too overwhelming, it's too daunting. So that might be children with SEND, it might be particularly vulnerable children in your class. So they might just publish a very small section, and that might be enough and an achievement for them at that stage. It also makes it an easier task, the task of publishing for the teacher to manage. Let's see, so these children might focus on just editing spellings, and they might be working from a support plan. So their work might look very different. Some children, as we know, relish the challenge of publishing the whole of the writing, will give a lot of time for it. So it's about very much knowing your audience, but making it bespoke and making it fit for every child in your class. Okay, next slide, please. Okay.
Thanks, Emma. That's over to me again.
Handing over to you. Sorry, I pressed mute by accident there. Over to you then, Sarah, now. Thank you very much.
There's a question that's come up in the chat, but I think we'll be addressing that as we go through the actual exemplification materials. So hang on to it, and when we get to the end, if we've not addressed it properly, you can ask again. So once we've established that process, we are then looking for outcomes, and we're looking for them being linked to the national curriculum. As I said, we agreed these standards, exemplified standards, locally agreed across our trust, and we use a comparative assessment style to moderate against the standards and broadly agree quickly whether or not the standards are, the writing is in line or not. Next slide, please. Okay. So as I previously mentioned, we agree the standard and we use some annotations as a guide, which enables teachers to be guided into that agreed standard. And it gives us a picture of where the children are currently at against that standard and identify their next steps. So we use questions such as, is this writing broadly in line? Is it better than, or is it not quite there yet? And actually that's really straightforward to do for most people, and you can cross genre with it. So you can use something from one genre and another when you're actually doing this way of comparing. And part of the work was inspired to some degree by the work of Daisy Christodoulou and the no more marking approach, which we did use and got benefit from, and could really see that at a glance you can really tell which whether the writing's in line or not. But the beauty in it is really around discussing why we think that. And we need to talk about it. We need to improve our subject knowledge, and it helps us to know the children as writers and what their next steps should be. And it actually helps that transition into the next year group, so that we have all agreed against this standard. And just a note, it is different, as I've already said, from the moderation activities that take place in year 2 and year 6 via the local authority. Next slide, please. So when we were looking at this, we first of all, as a group of subject leaders, needed to know what those expectations look like in terms of outcome. And we planned a progression journey for them to be on track 3 times a year within year 3, 3 times a year within year 4, for example, and every other year group. And we needed some benchmarking to support. And there are other benchmarking exemplification materials available, but we did use the focus. I don't know if you're familiar with the focus writing exemplification. They've got a document that shows at age-related expectations, and one for the higher as well, at greater depth or mastery. EMAT, that's ours. So we've developed our own benchmarking, our own exemplification, and it's freely available on our website. In the interest of sharing, you might disagree with some of the things that I said, but this is fully agreed. So it's there as a starting point for people who are wanting to do their own. But there's so much out there if you search for writing exemplification through Google. But Focus is the one where we really started. So Mark, if you could click that hyperlink, that will hopefully take us to the website and that document.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's just loading up at the moment. Apologies, everyone. There seems to be a bit of a lag between the slides this morning. I can't do much about it, sadly. So we should be up and running again shortly.
It is normally quicker than this.
Yes, yeah. It's always much quicker in the dry run, and then when it comes to the actual show time, we get the gremlins. That's right. Why don't
you want me to try?
Well, I tell you, why don't I stop sharing for a moment, because that might just be slowing it down. So bear with me for a moment. By all means, if anybody has any thoughts or opinions currently, then it's worth noting down in the chat. It's always good to share thoughts.
Do you want me to share, Mark? Mine's come up straight away.
Yeah, you know what? That's absolutely fine, Sarah. If you want to go ahead.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that link on the slides, when you get them, will take you straight through to the exemplification, and it exemplifies writing from reception all the way through to year 6. And here are the annotations that I was talking about. So this is not a checklist. This is annotated guide, really, into writing. So as a group of subject leaders, we looked at the writing at moderation, and we came up with this list of annotations, and we cross-referenced with other writing exemplification, and for us that was Focus. And we looked at writing at both the expected standard for what we agreed locally in our trust was what we'd want to see in year 3 in November. So here's an example of what we were talking about. So this is a character description around Mr. Fox and the kinds of things that we would want to see in that, and the annotations go with it. So it's not a tick off, it guides us into what we're looking for. Okay. And I'll show you one further on in the year. June's missing from, March is missing from this document, but we do have a March set as well. So I'm going to update it soon with some more recent examples post-COVID, which are in line with the expectation that actually we agreed last night. So we've done this twice. We've done it remotely in March and in June. And so I've got some more examples to update. And here is the expected standard for June, so you can see where the progression is in it. And here's an example. So I'm not going to spend too long on that, because you can look through that yourselves if you're interested. But it's all there, and like I said, I will be updating that soon. That's another one on my long list of things to do. So I'll stop sharing now. Mark, if you want to go back to the next slide.
No problem. Thanks very much, Sarah. There you go. Can you see that?
No. Oh, yes. Yes. Brilliant. Thank you. So really, you could create your own exemplification either based on ours or somebody else's. And we just, can we just go back a minute? Sorry. To the previous slide. Don't worry, just stay here. No, it's back and back again. I've got the slides if you want me to share them. Oh, there we go. So again, the annotations are a guide in this instance and not a checklist. That's really what I wanted to come back to. Otherwise, if you're using it as a tick off, you'll find that your writing may be artificially low. Okay, next slide, please. So this is how we do it, how we moderate using those materials. So we meet together, has been face-to-face, but recently we've done 2 virtual ones, and actually that's worked really well virtually, and we'll probably stick to it being virtually. There's a lot of advantage there that we've found, which is paper, so we're not photocopying, lots of paper, so everyone sees the same. And we've cut down on travelling time, and we're focused. So when we have a piece of writing on the screen that we're sharing, we're all looking at the same thing rather than in pairs or smaller groups. We're looking at it together and discussing it together. So in the year groups, each year group is assigned a facilitator. So in our context, in our trust, we have English subject leaders and all members of senior leadership teams who facilitate that meeting. It's really important that you've got a leader or a facilitator, because in the early stages, we needed to model this process, because what we were finding was teachers were bringing a really good one. So because we had this kind of confidence issue with some teachers, we were finding people were ensuring they brought a really good one to the meetings, and over time, and I'm not talking very much either, so it needed modelling. But over time, what we found is teachers now are bringing the ones that they have got question marks over, and they're talking through it. And then it opens up to everyone else to comment. It's really positive, actually, and open. And like I said, I kind of hinted around a culture change, which has happened. You need some trust here that we are going to talk about it openly in a non-judgmental way. So I used to brief all the facilitators on the process, and they modelled it. And this was essential in the setup, but we don't do that so much now because everybody knows what we're doing. And this is how a meeting runs. So we share and remind everybody in that meeting. So for a year 4 meeting, we'll remind everyone of what we've agreed the exemplified standard will be and is, and we show it. And we show the annotations, and everybody in that year group has a copy of that anyway, so they should be familiar with them. But it's really important to start the meeting with the standard that we've agreed. And then we'll share examples of pupils writing at what teachers are saying is the expected standard, or they're not sure about, and we'll discuss it. So that goes on screen. And usually it's straightforward to see whether that piece is in line better than or not there yet. And what happens then is a discussion about why. So we've got teachers articulating what they're seeing are particularly good features around that writing. And we've got now to a stage where we do discuss the higher levels of writing. And last night that came naturally. So with some that were almost where they needed to be for age-related expectations. And we had some that were better than that. And we had some that were on their way to showing mastery, but not quite there yet. So teachers are getting very skilled now at being able to talk that through, and that we agreed those pieces of writing as a group, and we add to the annotations if we need to. And that'll be my job next, is to pick out the relevant examples from each facilitator of those year groups from last night's moderation for June, and put them into the portfolio. So I used to regularly meet with the English subject leaders to do this. So there's like 2 checks. There's the check in the meeting, and then there's another check with all the subject leaders. And this is something that I now need to pick back up as we're working in a changed but in a more normalised way. I can bring subject leaders together, whether that's face-to-face or virtually, to discuss these pieces from the moderation. And like I said, they are different genre, but you can compare using those annotations a genre against another genre. It doesn't have to be the same. You can look for those features within the sentences and within paragraphing and the text as a whole, regardless of genre. Some are slightly challenging. So, for example, instructions is always a bit of a challenge. But the instructions that we looked at in year 4 were more complex than instructions that we'd seen in the past. So did fit. So we could see within the sentences whether they were broadly in line with the pieces that we'd already exemplified and the annotations. And we did this 3 times a year. So we usually meet in November, we meet in March, and we meet in June, and we find that that's enough to really move that writing along, and it's become practice now. So in your setting, you might be in the same situation as us. It could be that you've got a trust or a cluster of schools that you're working with. Or it can work in one school, so you can use the phases together, but we have found a real benefit in working across schools, because there's always something to magpie as well. So there's so much that comes from collaboration, ideas for audience and purpose. So they were quite challenging to get genuinely real audiences and purposes when we first started doing this. But now it kind of runs and people just pick up from different ones, and how things are presented, and marking and feedback, that importance of revising and editing. So what we find is people will show their the writing with revising and editing on it, which is great because you can see the whole process. But then I'll also ask for a published piece if they took it through to publishing, so that in the portfolio, as it's going to be from now on, we might have the 2 versions. We'll have the revised and edited version and a published piece. So like I said, it's still under development and there's still other ideas to include, but this is what we're finding seems to be working really well. Next slide, please, Mark. Okay, this is just an example. It's a photocopy piece. It was actually in full glorious Technicolor, but this was a piece from one of the schools, and a number of the schools in our trust are from mining communities, old mining communities, and Armthorpe is certainly one, and really important in curriculum, as you know, to work with the community and where we're based and tailor make that to where those children are growing up, and celebrate the history of why that village is there and why it's been there and why it's been successful. And Armthorpe was prolific really with Markham, Maine during the miners' strike, and some of those some of the children of family members still that were part of all of that, and we can use that as a rich resource. So we've tried to really link our writing outcomes in line with the curriculum and community aspects. So this was a whole celebration of the mining community, and it's organised into paragraphs, and it's a recount. So they'll have used all the recount features for this and the recount graphic organizer to get to this stage. It's a culmination of a lot of work, as you can almost make out from the little photographs there in black and white. So this is one, a June expectation that we've agreed is where we want it to be for year 4 in June. And I've also included a slide with the annotations for June as well, which is next. And in our portfolio, there's a higher level of that as well. And you can see why one's higher than the other. So we can see all the annotations within that writing. Although handwriting is a little bit of a cheat. There is another version in there that is handwritten, and that's why the handwriting one is in there. This one was typed. Okay, next slide, please, Mark. I feel like you need to do a little whistle while it's changing over. Emma, do you want to just talk about impact? Because you've seen that at where you working.
Yeah, now we've worked in this way for about 2 years in terms of trust moderation and comparative judgment. So it has had a huge impact, but it did take time, obviously. As we know, things do take time. Over the course of the last 2+ years, a real feeling of trust and collaboration has developed over time. And we had our moderation meeting last night, actually, our June one, and it was apparent that colleagues were so willing to share in reflective dialogue. They were so happy to talk. And actually, I said at the end of the year 3 one, which I led, you know, I felt so proud because I really didn't need to say a lot. I modelled it, and then it was very much, it was that kind of, that gradual release of responsibility method that we used within that model, really. And colleagues were just talking, and they were talking about their piece of writing against standard and using the terminology and the dialogue that Sarah spoke about earlier. And it was really, really rewarding to kind of sit back and look at that. And then within that, little networks develop. So where there might be a school that feels a little bit lacking in confidence, perhaps say in early years, then support's offered from the person leading the early years meeting. So lots of networking, relationships, trust, collaboration. Absolutely brilliant, but it does take time. And like Sarah said, it was very much a feeling of, right, we all bring our best gold standard piece initially, but it's not like that now. Colleagues bring pieces that they're not too sure about. Over the course of the last 2 years, teachers' subject knowledge and pedagogy has improved dramatically because they know the standard inside out. They know what we're aiming for with writing in November. They know what we're aiming for with writing in February, March, how it should look in June. So teachers know that, they're entrenched in it, they know it inside out. Also, modelled writing sessions have much more clarity and precision now because teachers are so familiar with that standard and know what they have to do. And obviously, it's had a really, really positive impact on children's writing. People across the trust and schools that we network and work with have all shared ideas for audiences and purposes, and that's become in turn much more innovative, much more creative, a wealth of knowledge about authors that are willing to engage with us. So best practice is very much now shared. It's not staying in one classroom in one year group or in 2 schools or a handful of schools. It's shared across the trust, and then it's shared with other schools that network and partner up with us. Also, another aspect is the really positive outcomes in cross-curricular writing. So teachers model these text types, children write them. But then to really, really know if children are familiar with these text types and are truly independent writers, teachers then ask them to write a report in science, or an explanation text in history, or write a biography of some historical key figure, such as Martin Luther King. And children do it and they love it, and things have become much more embedded and the norm. So obviously all of these combine for a really sharp, gradual, but then a sharp rise in the standard of pupil outcomes. And obviously then children leave each year group at a higher standard and enter the next year group in a really good position to move forward with the writing. So it's been really, really rewarding. And actually last night was the best meeting ever, really, I think, where it really had clicked, and it was really apparent that all teachers were really in a good place to discuss their writing against standard and make accurate judgments. Okay, thank you. I'll hand back over to you then, Sarah, I think.
Okay, I think it's questions and reflections now, Mark. I think there are a number of questions in the chat. I've seen them pop in, but I can't really access all of them.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, there's a few in the chat here. Quite a long one here from Sian Forbes. Sian, I don't know if you wanted to unmute and ask your question, so I'm not essentially just reading out what you've put. So do feel free to unmute and ask.
Hello. So we have been moderated in year 6 and had very much like the experience that you've talked about, like lots of discussion and looking at a range of writing for year 6. But then we've got some people experiencing year 2 where it is more of like a secure fit model and feels a bit more like a checklist. And so we're just a little bit lost on what to do year 1. Do we move towards more of that, you know, have they met it this many times, or would you say still stick with the discussion and the you know, looking at the exemplification and that sort of process that you've talked about? We're just a bit lost with year 1, that's all it is.
Thanks, Sian. Well, I can only speak from our own experience, really, and the year 2 and year 6 moderation in the summer term sit separately from this. This is around a progression track, really, for writing, and we do use the same approach, the discussion, the exemplification in year 1. So we have particularly skilled a member of the SLT who will lead that meeting, and year 1 pieces of writing are included in the portfolio, in the exemplification portfolio. So it works pretty much in the same way through discussion. So what we find is the writing progresses, and we don't seem to have any issue of changing tack into year 2, because year 2 pick it up as well. So we use the approach with you in November and early on in the spring term, and then they move to the externally moderated model in the summer term, but they still come back. So I think there's some year 2 LA moderation the day before yesterday. What day was that? Tuesday, that's the day. And then yesterday we had our moderation, and we align the 2 in those meetings, if you like, in the summer term meeting for year 2 and year 6. I hope that answers your question. It works for us, and it's certainly not it's not a shock to the system or anything. It does kind of gradually come into line.
Brilliant, thank
that
you.
helps. Okay.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We've got another question here from, I'm not sure who it is, but they're here as Miss J. Miss J, if you want to reveal yourself and go through your question.
Sorry, I'm Cairns from West Cornwall down here in the sunshine today, actually. Yeah, I've just had a conversation on Tuesday with members of my MAT, so the English leads from my MAT. There's not many of us, there's only 4 of us. But we were thinking to move away from kind of the year group criteria as such, towards doing like 2 bits of writing alongside our assessment week and using those. So rather than doing the long kind of pieces of work that kind of are independent but also kind of have peer reviews and, you know, stuff like that going on in them as well, I think we were just worried that is a bit too much scaffolding for them rather than being actually their own work. So we were going to just do 2 bits in assessment week, maybe 1 fiction, 1 non-fiction, and use those. I kind of feel like I'm juggling which one is more appropriate or whether to use both and kind of do a best fit. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, my thoughts on that are both are acceptable, really, and it's about being honest about what people are bringing. So if there's a truly independent piece, that's absolutely fine. And what we do find is teachers in our meetings will say, and I'll actually ask if that's not coming through. So I'll ask how much is modelled and which part has had modelling. And in Emma's explanation, she talked about elements being modelled. So it's not, nothing is overly modelled. It's 2 or 3 sentences really. So that would key in. And what we'd see is teachers saying, just ignore that first bit because that's they've taken a good steer from the model in there. But this is the bit that is truly independent. And actually, children are allowed to revisit. So they are allowed to revisit and revise and edit. In statutory year groups, that's also acceptable. Yeah. So it would be the same. And I'd have no issue really over either. So one is like the teaching of writing, and as long as teachers say, okay, this bit's been possibly had too much scaffolding, ignore that bit, but look at this bit, that's fine. And what we are finding, what I found in the year 4 one last night was people were bringing pieces that had that applied. So for example, report being taught in applied. So I was finding that was coming through, and we've had all those conversations about openness, and actually you can really tell if it's been over scaffolded. Does that help at all?
It's just kind of what you use for your data drop, isn't it? It's you know, it's
yeah. But then when they go back to it, you see, you could get into all sorts here. But we use scores for everything. So we use scores and allocate scores even to writing, and we use scores for our standardized scores and scale scores in terms of our tracking, and it does all fit with that. That's almost another conversation. So if you want to use completely independent pieces of writing, there's no issue at all with that. You know, you're getting a picture of what children can independently do. It's always worth having a debate over. But even within the teaching of writing, it's still there's still independent parts to it.
Yeah, and just to build on what Sarah said, I think the afternoon where children are applying the tech types and everything has been modelled to a historical report or a scientific explanation. So you might help them initially kind of do a quick plan. You might have an audience and purpose still, but then what they write will be pretty much independent at that point. And you're hoping that everything that you've taught them initially is then applied in that afternoon cross-curricular writing. So then you do build up a bank in your topic books, however you collate it, of much more independent pieces of writing.
Yeah.
So that's how we look at it here.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers.